Morning YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. This is IMX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over who I believe the NFL receiving yards leaders in the NFL will be. So I made a list of my top 10 receivers for this year coming up, and I think that I overestimated a lot of the yards because I think that there's a great potential for a lot of these guys, and I don't want to underestimate anyone. So I'd rather overestimate than underestimate, and that's why I made a list of 10 players first of all, and also that's why I have 10 players above 1,300 yards. Because in recent history, that did happen in 2015 and 2018, so it's not completely unlikely, but it's less likely than having 5 or 6 players with over 1,300 yards. I think last year was an anomaly, so that's why I have extra players over this year. So it'll be interesting to see how the season ends up going. But for the purposes of this video, I overestimated just a little bit to define boundaries of who I think is going to be the highest and who I think is going to be somewhere in the mix, has a chance at getting it at least. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. It's a little different than the format of the normal videos I do like this, but without further So to start off this video, I have at number 10 Amari Cooper. I'm going to be going through each of these players pretty quickly because I don't want to run this video extremely long. So each player will get a minute and a half. So first is Amari Cooper. Last season he had 119 targets, 79 receptions, 1,189 yards, and 8 touchdowns. In 2020 I project him to have a couple more targets and a higher catch percentage, not by a lot but by a little bit, and lower his yards per reception. So he's going to have considerably more receptions in total, but less yards per reception for a total of 1,305 yards. I think that this is completely doable because I think that the Cowboys are going to want to continue their powerful offense. And they also, they lost Randall Cobb in the offseason to the Texans. And I think that they also are down a couple of other players. So I'm not 100% positive, but I don't think that their wide receiving core is as strong as it was last year. So I think that Amari Cooper is going to pull away a little bit. Not a lot more than last year, but a little bit more, and he's going to get 1,300. Just barely break that number. So he's coming in at number 10. I'm sorry, I don't have any tight ends on this list. I know that there are 2 very major tight ends that are insanely good at the game, but I didn't put them on here because because I know that they've both gotten over 1,300 yards in the past, but I don't expect them to get it this year. So I'm more inclined to put just wide receivers on the receiving yards list than tight ends, because I don't think the tight ends are as likely to get the title. Next is Deandre Hopkins, who I believe will have 150 targets for 104 receptions, 1,165 yards, 11.2 yards per reception, and 7 touchdowns. I have him having considerably more yards per reception, even though, because his career average is around 13.6, so I put just a little bit above his career average. I think last year was a down year for him, and I think that with the Cardinals he's going to improve. He's going to have less targets than last year because he's on a team with Larry Fitzgerald. He was not with Larry Fitzgerald last year, so I think that he'll have less targets and less catches, but he'll have more average DeAndre Hopkins yards per reception. So that's where I'm getting the 14 from, and 11 touchdowns. I would have him in the 1400s, but considering he's on a team with Larry Fitzgerald, who's been a veteran for that team for a very long time, I can't put him too high because Larry Fitzgerald's also going to be taking some catches. He's not going to be taking all the catches, but I put him as a couple less targets than he had last year, or normally would have had. Next is Juju Smith-Schuster, who's going to be the starting wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. In 2018, when Ben Roethlisberger was there, he had 166 targets for 111 receptions, 1,426 yards, 12.8 yards per reception, and 7 touchdowns. This year in 2020, I think he'll have a couple less targets, a couple less catches, and a couple more yards per reception. I think that he's had more yards per reception in previous years than he did in 2018 in his first couple seasons, and I think that he'll have an amazing season this year. Maybe not as many yards as 2018, but I think that, because I don't know how powerful the Steelers offense is going to be, but he very well could get the title considering Antonio Brown's gone, and in that 14-26 season, Antonio Brown had 1,300 yards of his, had a decent number of yards of his own. I'm not sure how many he had, but he had a lot. So, I think he might have had in the 1500s, I'm not really sure. But considering he's going to be the starting wide receiver, I think that 1340 is a very fair guess for Juju Schuster, and he could very well do better than that as well. Next is Davante Parker. In 2019, he had 128 targets, 72 receptions, 1,202 yards, 16.7 yards per reception, and 9 touchdowns. I think that this season his targets will go up, his receptions will go up, and his reception percentage will go up. He'll get 12 more targets and 13 more catches, so I think that he'll catch a higher percent of his passes, and he'll have less yards per reception, because if you catch more, then you're going to have a lower average. If you catch more shorter passes, you're going to have a lower average. So I lowered his average a little bit. I gave him a couple more receptions, and he ended up at 1360 for yards. And I have him around 10 touchdowns. I don't know how accurate that is, but I thought that 1360 was pretty accurate considering he had a better second half than first half of the season, and that trend might continue. So I'm expecting him to have a pretty solid season this year coming up. Next on the list, we have Davante Adams, who has been prolific in the past. Last year, he only played 12 games, and in those 12 games, he had about 1,000 yards. But in 3/4 of the season, having 1,000 yards, that's on track for 1333, which is pretty dang good. He had 127 targets and 83 receptions for 12 yards per reception and 5 touchdowns. The touchdowns were below average for 12 games for him. The yards per reception were about average, and the targets were a little below average for him. So I gave him some extra targets, and I gave him around the same reception percentage. It might be a little bit higher. And for I think it is a little bit higher, because I think that last year his reception percentage was down, and that's one of the reasons why he had less yards. And then I gave him 1450 yards because of that, and I kept his yards per reception about the same, because that is really his career average. And I gave him some more touchdowns, because he usually has a lot. He usually has a pretty solid touchdown performance. So I think that I've always loved Davante Adams. I had him on my fantasy team a couple of years, and I think that he's great. And I think that in a 16-game season, with a couple of the Packers' main receivers out, Davante Adams, frankly, is their best receiver, but they have a couple of their secondary guys out, and I think that could give him even more targets than he would have had if coronavirus didn't exist. Next is Michael Thomas. And yes, I know everyone's going to yell at me for putting Michael Thomas 5th. So if you check out my NFL MVP video up above, I didn't really think about the other wide receivers in the league. So what I did in that video is I put Michael Thomas and Christian McCaffrey as the receiving and the rushing leaders of the league. But then I realized, wait a second, there's a lot of other players in the league. And so I realized that Derrick Henry is probably going to be the rushing leader, and Michael Thomas probably will not be the receiving leader. Because if you look at Randy Moss, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, the best, they don't repeat 2 years in a row usually, so it's not saying that it won't happen. But first of all, they usually don't repeat 2 years in a row. Second of all, they don't win it every year. Michael Thomas, just because he had a million receptions last year, doesn't mean he's going to get the most receiving yards this year. So last year he had 185 targets, 149 receptions, 1,725 yards, and 9 touchdowns, with 11.6 yards per reception. This season I have him having 20 less targets. I think that Drew Brees is going to throw the ball less considering he's getting older, and they're going to want to keep him healthy, and they might give more targets to other players, especially Jared Cook, who had a great season last year. I also think that his yards per reception will be similar, and his receptions per target will be similar. I actually gave him a higher catch, slightly lower, not a lot, but slightly lower catch percentage than last year, which I don't think is a big difference. It really was like 2 or 3% difference. And so I think the big difference here is he'll have less targets. And I think that that's the only thing, is that he'll get thrown the ball less, but I think he'll catch more touchdowns. I think he'll have bigger plays, more important plays, but less of them. So I think that he'll still have an outstanding season with leading the league in receiving touchdowns, just not yards. I also think I have him leading the league in receptions too. I'm not sure about that one, but I do think he might be leading it in receptions. Next is Chris Godwin, who I have as having 155 targets, 105 catches for 1,500 yards and 14.3 yards per reception. So everyone's going to ask me why Mike Evans isn't on this list. So first of all, Chris Godwin is in company with Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski. So expecting him to have 1,500 yards is a tall task. So I think that because of the way Brady plays, I think that Gronk and Mike Evans are going to get a decent amount of yards, but neither of them are going to have prolific numbers. Gronk will have 1,100, Mike Evans will have 1,100. He's not going to want to give the ball to Mike Evans as much as he's going to want to give it to Chris Godwin, because Mike Evans is a deeper threat. Mike Evans averages 17 yards per reception for his career. Chris Godwin, I think, is going to be more of Brady's slot receiver with some deep balls. So if he gives Edelman a little over 1,000 yards every year, or averages around 1,000 yards if he played every game, then I would assume he would do the same with Chris Godwin, except he would get more yards because he has a deeper role as well as that slot receiver role. So I think that he'll probably end up in the 13 or 1400s, but I put him at 1,500 because last year he only played 13 games, and with a better quarterback, I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt and raise his yards a little bit. So Chris Godwin is my number 4. Coming in at number 3, I have the man, the myth, the legend, Tyreek Hill, with 140 targets, 96 receptions, 1,540 yards, and 16 yards per reception, with 9 touchdowns. So last year, he only played 12 games, which is 3/4 of the season, and he regressed in yards per reception. I think that this year he's going to bounce back in his yards per reception. He's going to play a full 16 games. He'll have 140 targets, he'll have 96 catches, and he'll ball out. Patrick Mahomes has proven that he can consistently play at a high level, and with no other major receivers besides Sammy Watkins and Travis Kelce is a major receiver, I think that Tyreek Hill will get more catches, and he'll get more yards, and everything will be dandy in Tyreek Hill land. At number 2, I have Adam Thielen, and a lot of people might think this is a controversial pick because of the season that Adam Thielen had last year, but I do not. In 2018, with Stephon Diggs having 150 targets, Adam Thielen had 153 targets, 113 receptions, 1,373 yards, and 9 touchdowns. In 2020, I think that he can have 180 targets with Stephon Diggs gone, 122 receptions, second in the league for receptions, I believe, after Michael Thomas, 1,630 yards, and 13.4 yards per reception. Because his career average is more than 12.2 yards per reception. He usually has 13 or 14 in his good seasons. And I think coming off of a bad year, he's going to regress towards his mean, which is something that statistically, according to psychology, happens to people. He's going to regress towards his average. Whether regression is up or down, if he had a bad year, he's going to come back towards the mean. And so, saying that he'll have his average yards per reception, he'll have more targets, and he'll have more catches. And so last year, considering he played 10 games, that's not a good sample size of a season to see how well he actually performed. So I think that he might be comeback player of the year. I don't know if he can win it after playing 10 games last year, but he'll definitely be pseudo comeback player of the year. And he'll have 1,630 yards and redeem himself from last year's season. Last but not least is Julio Jones, who, for the 3rd time in his career, I believe, will be getting the receiving title. In 2019, he had 157 targets, 99 catches, 1,394 yards, and 14.1 yards per reception, with 6 touchdowns. He was second in the league for yards. This year coming up, I think that Matt Ryan is going to ball out. I think that Matt Ryan is going to want to prove himself, considering his defense is so bad and he needs to prove himself in order to be proven, because his defense is trash. So he'll throw 172 passes to Julio Jones. Austin Hooper's gone, that'll take away a big chunk of his passes, and a lot of those will go to Julio Jones. Next, he'll have, also, Mohamed Sanu's still gone. He was gone last year, he's still gone, so that's another spot that they need to fill in the offense. I think of those 172, he'll catch 112, which is about his career average yards per reception percentage, and I think that he'll have 15.5 yards per reception, which is about his career average, leaving him with 1,736 yards, just slightly below last year Michael Thomas, and he'll have 8 touchdowns, because that's what he does. He'll have 8 touchdowns is a lot. 8 touchdowns is very good for any wide receiver, but he'll have the best yards in the league, and then he'll have 7 touchdowns. He'll have every single yard that anyone could ever want, and he'll have 5 touchdowns. One year he had third amount of yards in the league and he had 3 touchdowns or something. Or he might have led the league and he had 3 touchdowns. So I have him at 8 touchdowns, which is lower on this list than some of the other players, but that's just what he does. So I hope you guys enjoy my list. I think that Julio Jones is, like I did with Ezekiel Elliott. You want to bet on the winning team, and by that I mean you want to bet on the most consistent player. And Julio Jones and Ezekiel Elliott are the 2 most consistent players with the longest amount of time playing. So that's why I have Elliott getting the rushing leader and Julio getting the receiving leader. If you want to see why I chose Elliott, check out my other video. Actually, he's not the rushing leader, so check it out now if you want to actually know. So thank you guys all for watching. Make sure to comment down below who you think will be the receiving leader, and like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel. We're trying to reach 30 subscribers at the end of this week, and make sure to, subscribe. So thank you guys all for watching. I enjoy seeing you every day, even though I don't see you, you see me. And see you all tomorrow. Peace out.